last part of this little trio is also, well, definitely Subversion and Sex. And I would say sex, subversion, sex, and sex, sex, sex. Because it is, of course, the Bloomsbury group. Ladies, are you all right over there? Come here, Duncan, come and sit closer and just learn a bit about group sex. Don't worry, it's not a practical demonstration. It's just to inflame your imagination. The Bloomsbury group, or Set as they like to be called, were a group of friends and relatives from upper middle class, well-connected families who were artists, critics, writers and intellectuals. They all lived and worked in the squares of Bloomsbury during the first half of the 20th century. The Bloomsbury Set actually began when Toby Stevens, who was living with his sisters Virginia and Vanessa at number 46 Gordon Square, decided to bring his university pals home. The sisters, being girls and not being allowed to go to university, were very excited to meet Toby's friends. Toby's friends were Clive Bell, Maynard Keynes, Leonard Woolf, Ralph Partridge, Lytton Strachey and his cousin Duncan Grant, E.M. Forster and Robert Fry. The initial meeting was a great success. The boys found the girls beautiful, erudite, and most intellectually challenging. By 1905, the group were meeting regularly at Gordon Square and enjoying discussions about art, philosophy, sex that were not fettered by social restraints or politeness. Indeed, outspoken indecency was considered a cardinal virtue. These friends shared a loosely overlapping consensus of ideas and attitudes, which were, are you Bloomsbury setting?
Do you want me to light the
No, we're hot enough, thank you, darling. Yes, what their philosophy was to pursue the creation and enjoyment of aesthetic experience and knowledge, to maintain their right to love who they chose to love and to live how they liked, to reject the bourgeois habits and conventions of Victorian life, to encourage, criticize and promote each other's work and careers. Politically, they were mainly left-wing liberals who supported women's fight for equality but were conscientious objectors during the war. But of course, the thing the Bloomsbury Set is mainly remembered for is their bohemian lifestyle that encouraged and celebrated unconventional relationships. It was said of the Bloomsbury Set that they lived in squares and loved in triangles. Although there were a number of triangular relationships, personally I think hexagonal would have been more accurate. For the Bloomsbury Set made polyamory within their hetero, bi and homosexual relationships de rigueur. They practiced a great deal of a great many kinds of love. Lytton Strachey, who was a key member of the group, described them as being ladies in love with buggers and buggers in love with womanizers. Lytton Strachey was a homosexual and close friend of Virginia Woolf. He had a long-term relationship with the artist Dora Carrington, who accepted his many male lovers. Lytton was also in love with Duncan Grant throughout his whole life. And here we have a picture of Lytton Strachey with Virginia Woolf. I was very interested in their relationship, and I actually wrote a poem about their relationship, which I called Literary Lions. Lytton and Virginia were literary lions. They prowled around the Bloomsbury Set, vetting interlopers that they met, pronouncing them suitable or maybe not yet. Their writing set the world aflame, their bohemian lifestyle banished shame. They tipped convention on its head for a new life order, or so they said. Who would have thought that he and she would strike up a friendship so immediately? A connection that lasted their whole life through, closer than lover, husband or wife. He, tall and thin, racked with crippling fear, terrified of intimacy, yet desperate to be near. She, of similar stature, tormented by self-doubt, wanting to be uninhibited, struggling to let it out. Both driven by ambition and desire to be rich. Both like to gossip, ruminate and bitch. Suffer romantic torment and unrequited love, whilst their long-suffering partners struggle to rise above. A monumental friendship based on values both held dear. A very English friendship, eccentric and queer. Thank you. This evening, I'm going to focus on just two members of the Bloomsbury Set. Virginia Woolf, 1882 to 1941, and Duncan Grant, 1885 to 1978. Virginia Woolf is one of the most famous female writers of the modernist era. Her novels, Mrs. Dalloway, A Room of One's Own, To the Lighthouse, Orlando and Waves, are recognised as contemporary classics. Duncan Grant was a painter whose work was strongly influenced by the post-impressionists. He designed large-scale murals for municipal buildings and worked with Diaghilev's Ballet Rouge. His paintings were exhibited at the Venice Biennale, the Royal Academy, and the Tate. Right, I'm just going to show you some pictures. So here's Virginia Woolf, and you can see what she looked like. And here is Duncan Grant. Please do come over and pick up these photographs. You see he's the most stunningly handsome man. Handsome. And this is actually one of the murals that that he did, Duncan did, for the Borough Polytechnic. It's called Bathers. A lot of his work was naked men, his particular interest. So please have a look at them later. Although Duncan and Virginia had very contrasting characters, there were some clear parallels in their life. And also Virginia and Duncan had familial links, as Duncan was in a relationship and lived with Virginia's sister, Vanessa. So here are some of the parallels. Virginia and Leonard Woolf had a loving, supportive, and mainly platonic relationship that lasted 29 years until Virginia's death in 1941. Apart from Leonard, Virginia's successful sexual relationships were exclusively with women. Leonard accepted and befriended Virginia's lover throughout their life together. Their relationship was a creative and nurturing one. Together they set up the Hogarth Press, which printed many avant-garde classics of the time. Duncan Grant and Vanessa Bell were also in a substantial, loving, albeit mainly platonic relationship. And they lived together for more than 41 years, until Vanessa's death in 1961. With Robert Fry, they set up the Omega Workshop and collaborated artistically throughout their life together at Charleston House. Apart from Vanessa, Duncan's other sexual relationships were exclusively homosexual. Vanessa accepted and befriended his lovers throughout their life together. These parallels apart, in other ways, the two could not have been more contrasting. Virginia Woolf was shy, hypersensitive and awkward. She was ambitious and could be sarcastic and cruel if she felt threatened. She suffered from attacks of anxiety and depression for most of her life, resulting in a number of nervous breakdowns and her death by suicide when she was 59 years old. Duncan Grant, on the other hand, was relaxed and affable. His natural charm was apparently devastating. Oh! You see, even the dog likes the sound of him. Do you want to just get up?
Yeah.
Actually, wait, while you do that. You know what they say, darling, about performing with children and animals?
Yes.
Ah, you don't do it too upstagey. Although she used to do it. Virginia, as I said, was shy, threatened, ended up killing herself. Duncan Grant was, his natural charm was devastating and very indiscriminate. He was a natural flirt. Modest, unassuming, and startlingly handsome, he was admired and pursued by many. In fact, Virginia's sister Vanessa was determined to and succeeded in seducing him one night and bearing his child. They just had sex the one time. She was determined. She must have timed it when she was in season. Not one person, male or female, in the Bloomsbury set had a bad word to say about Duncan. It was said that they were all in love with him at some time or other. He certainly had sex with most of them. Duncan had a dizzying list of male lovers which continued well up to his 80s. And as for Virginia, she is portrayed in history as being frigid, a cold fish, someone not interested in sex. This was undoubtedly the case in her relationship with her husband Leonard. Here is an excerpt from Virginia's diary written whilst on honeymoon with Leonard. Why do people make such a fuss about marriage and copulation? I find the climax immensely exaggerated. Frigidity and lack of sexual passion was certainly not the case in Virginia's romantic and sexual relationships with women. She was an intense, tortured, and passionate lover. She had sexual relationships with a number of women, including Violet Dickinson, a family friend, and the suffrage composer Ethel Smythe. But in 1923, when Virginia was 43 and happily settled in married life, she met the woman who was to become the great love of her life, Vita Sackville West. Virginia described Vita thus: beautiful, dark, lustrous, ripe as a fig, tall and graceful, the two elements in her nature, feminine and masculine, combined into an appearance which is ravishing. Vita Sackville West was a woman of proud aristocratic lineage. She was happily married to fellow homosexual Harold Nicholson. Vita did admire and love Virginia, but she was a notoriously voracious and experienced lesbian who did not want to change her lifestyle. Virginia complained and begged to no avail. During the 4 years they were sexually involved, Vita ran hot, then cold, and had many, many other lovers. Virginia was actually a rampant letter writer, so I've been able to access a lot of the letters, the correspondence between Virginia that she sent to Vita. So this is one of the excerpts from Virginia. Dearest, I do adore you, every part, from heel to hair. And after a visit, staying one night at Long Barn, Vita dashed off this letter the following day. Yes, you are an agile animal, no doubt about it. As to your gambols being diverting, always. Also, the mushrooms, the crab, the log fire, the bed, all shall be credited to you. My darling, I'll keep Thursday free for any purpose you like. And then, unfortunately, later, when Vita was tiring with the novelty, the tone of the letters changed. And this is a letter that Virginia wrote to Vita just before they ended being lovers. I rang you up just now to find you are gone nutting in the woods with Mary Campbell or Mary Carmichael or Mary Seton, but not me. Damn you. Because unfortunately, there were quite a number of Marys. There were 6 or 7 Marys in that 4-year period, so I'm surprised that Virginia didn't get confused. I actually took a photocopy of a letter that she wrote to Vita after they'd spent a night together. This was when Virginia was just was writing the novel Orlando. Dearest, shall I come Saturday for the night? Seems the only chance is that time. Should you say, if I rang you up to ask, that you were fond of me? If I saw you, would you kiss me? If I were in bed with you, would you... I'm really rather excited about Orlando tonight and have been lying by the fire making up the last chapter. The fact was that Virginia wrote Orlando in an attempt to retain Vita's interest. She wrote it in 1928, and its central character in the novel is of fluctuating gender and is inspired by and dedicated to Vita. It was written in an attempt to keep her, but unfortunately it didn't work. And Vita merrily danced off to pastures new and her many more sexual conquests. Vita Sackville West's son, Nigel Nicholson, described the novel Orlando as being the longest and most charming love letter in literature. Vita and Virginia did remain romantic friends until Virginia's death in 1941. By contrast, Duncan Grant was an easy-going, good-looking guy who was passionate about 2 things: art and men. All types of men, lots of them, regularly throughout his whole life. His motto was, never be ashamed, and he lived his life with great honesty and gusto. Many of his lovers were men who posed for his paintings. His artistic legacy is a testament to the beauty of men of every age, race, and class. He also had long relationships with lovers who remained friends and supported him in his still handsome dotage. Amongst them, his cousin Lytton Strachey, Maynard Keynes, Paul Roche, and David Garnett, who actually went on to marry Angelica, Duncan and Vanessa's daughter. Talk about keeping it in the family. Lytton Strachey wrote of him, "It's happened, so violent. How supreme are the things of this earth. I've managed to catch a glimpse of heaven. It's Duncan." And later, "I want him to love me as I love him, and I want to deserve his love." So the Bloomsbury Set embraced a culture of sexual equality and freedom that influenced everything from art and literature to post-colonial politics. Their bohemian lifestyle, which openly celebrated homosexuality, combined with their literary success, contributed to a seismic shift in British attitudes towards the LGBT community. The Bloomsbury Set outraged and delighted society at the time, and still, to this day, continues to fascinate and inspire. So that is the end, I think, of me talking this evening. I'm going to suggest you have another drink, but there's one thing that I'd like to ask you to consider. How have the lives and actions of the Pankhursts, Stokes, and the Bloomsbury Set impacted on and influenced your life and experience today? And then I suggest we come back and we can have a chat. I'd like us all to chat together and in our little groups. Please don't feel you have to stay sitting in the same seat. It's Bloomsbury, remember. We can all mingle. But if you want to ask me any questions, that's also cool. Whatever you like, really. But for now, I think I need it. So, thank you.